John Roedel, man, thank you so much for being here.
It is my absolute honor to be here. Thank you so much for asking me.
Well, here's what happened. One day, I guess it was a Saturday morning, I'm out on a walk and I'm listening to Brian Scott's podcast, Reality Revolution. And I hear one of your poems that you were reading. And then I went and I listened to the entire interview, and I just felt an immediate connection with you as you told some of your story. I was like, I've got to get John on the show. And you were so gracious to respond quickly and agree. And I have been looking so forward to this podcast. And I will just tell the listener right now that as I prepare for this, I get excited to get to know each and every guest a little better. But in this one, John, I'm excited not just to hear more from you, how you became a writer, how as an artist and a creator, you are evolving, and just kind of the more I dig, the more I learn about that. I want to know more about it. But so much of what you're doing it inspires me and confirms in me that, okay, a lot of this doesn't look like it makes sense, but John is confirming that maybe it does. So with that kind of weird intro for the listener, not to get to get pretty deep pretty quick, I would just like to start with this. John, how did you become a poet?
Oh my goodness. I call myself an accidental poet. If anyone who ever taught me in grade school or my college professors or anyone who had any kind of academic relationship with me, which was usually one-sided because I was a terrible student. If anyone had any kind of relationship with me back when I was a student and they saw me now, they would never believe that I would have ever written poetry, let alone a sentence that made any sense to anybody else. I became a poet. That's a great question. I think I became a poet because I didn't have anywhere else to go. Yeah. I had reached kind of a rock bottom in my life, and I just started writing I'd never read poetry before. I wish I was one of those poets who wore an ascot and had like a fancy hat and walked into a room and said, no, I've been studying the classics my entire life. And no, I haven't. I barely got through the poetry units in all my education. It just happened one day where I was in a very bad place, both in my own faith life and just my personal life, vocational life. I was lost. And my MO before that, I was kind of a comedian. I liked making people laugh. And I wasn't feeling particularly funny. And I just went to my computer and I started having these fictional conversations with God on Facebook, just out of nowhere. And at first, I thought I was just doing it to kind of poke fun at, because I will say this: a lot of people, whenever I talked about how I wasn't feeling well, or my sadness or my depression, people said, you have to pray harder. Just pray harder. God will hear you. God, very hallmark answers and well-intended answers. Sure. I don't blame them. I probably have given those answers to other people in my life. And so I was very frustrated because I was born and raised Catholic. I had a very religious upbringing. I had worked for a church in my life. And all of a sudden I reached a point in my life where I was drawing into that well of my faith that I was told would be there for me. And I was drawing up empty. I was going into the well and I was just bringing up empty buckets. And so I was mad. And so I thought I'd go to Facebook and start having these fictional conversations with God where I kind of poke fun at faith a little bit and people's easy answers. And I was going to poke fun at self-help because I started reading any self-help book I could find, all these 10 steps to a better me, 15 steps to enlightened life.
Right.
And all those things were empty for me. And so I thought, well, I'm going to just start kind of making fun of all of that. And so God and I had these conversations where God and I would talk about why I shouldn't wear skinny jeans, whatever was on reality television the night before, whatever, and just have these benign conversations where I was kind of poking fun at faith because I was mad, and I was poking fun at self-help because I was even madder at them. And this was about 2015, and I didn't know how sick I was at the time. I didn't know what kind of dungeon I was in. I just knew I didn't feel well.
Yeah.
And so I kept having these conversations. And then I noticed every now and then I would slip in something real, something vulnerable about my life accidentally, because as a person who wanted to make people laugh my whole life, I wasn't really wanting to make people sad or feel something other than just me kind of making fun of something.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, I started having real conversations about depression, about what it's like to not have your faith that you once thought you clung to and thought it was part of your identity. And the more I did that, the more I noticed other people started following, who weren't just my friends and family, who weren't just liking my post because they felt guilty, but people who were like, no, I feel the same way.
Yeah.
No, I've been in that place myself. And then all of a sudden, I felt this insatiable urge inside me just to keep digging deeper and deeper. And within a year or two, I had thousands of followers. And within a couple of years after that, I wrote a book. And all of a sudden, and from that, poetry started coming. God started to respond to me in lyrics and in poetry. And it kind of cracked open this part. I kind of think of my heart as like a mansion,
Yeah.
like an old haunted mansion. And there was a wing of this mansion that was completely closed off that I had never visited before. And it was like the doors got ripped open to this other addition to the house. And I started exploring these parts of my heart. And all of a sudden, all these words were on the wall. And I just started transcribing them as best as I could. That's a crazy way of answering that question. But I'd never wanted to be a poet. It wasn't in my line of sight. And it just kind of emerged from me during my darkest moments.
So it's actually a perfect descriptor. And the verse that came to mind whenever I heard you on Brian Scott's podcast was this. And I think it's very apropos for what you just said. It's from Psalm 42 in the Bible that says, "Why are you downcast, O my soul? Why so disturbed within me? Put your hope in God, for I will yet praise him, my Savior and my God." And what you just said, poetry and lyrics, man, you're a modern day psalmist. It's not like that's what blew me away when you started to, and it's not where I expected you to go whenever I started listening to the podcast.
Right.
And here's why it reminded me of myself. So when I was much younger, I grew up in a very Southern Baptist upbringing. I would say not real strict, but those around me, we weren't supposed to drink and dance. You only, you pretend you don't know each other at the liquor store, all that good stuff, and the reason why I laughed at jokes like, the reason why you never take a Baptist fishing with you is because they'll drink all your beer. So we weren't like that uptight, but that was my background. Right. But so although it wasn't so fundamentalist that we couldn't have fun with it, I did have this unhealthy. I now have a healthy fear of God. I grew up with what I believe was an unhealthy fear of God until as an adult, I was in a position similar to yours, feeling very terrible. And I didn't shake my fist at God, but I cried out in anger. And it was almost like this feeling, what came back to me was, at least you're yelling in the right place. I hear you.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
It's not like there was no burning bush. The fireplace didn't ignite. There was no big call from on high. It was, uh-oh, did I lose you? Ooh.
I am so sorry about that. It was Wyoming internet is not great, but I think we're good now. It resets once a day. I think we're good for the day now.
It's not a problem at all, man. I stopped everything.
You can edit?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, perfect. Okay. Sorry about that.
No, we're good. As a matter of fact, we're recording now. Let's see. And boom. We're back.
We can go back to where
we're back. So what happened for me was I started realizing that it's okay to not just be in this formulated mindset of prayer, and which becomes, now I lay me down to sleep, all that. And look, fine, there's a place for, for that. But what I was so taken, and why I wanted this audience to hear your message so bad, the reason why I wanted so badly to have this audience hear your message was that you started having conversations with God. And I believe in there is no burning bush. He's speaking to your heart, and then you're able to put it out in the form of a poem. And so that's why I was like, oh man, I have got to meet him. That is such a beautiful story. And again, it's like you're a modern day psalmist. It really is, John.
I definitely never intended to ever. When I started doing it, it was more, I thought I was alone in how I felt. I thought, everyone talks about their faith life, and you see it's almost like an Instagram picture of people's faith life. You talk to, oh, God is easy for me. And, when I pray, God answers for me. And I was stuck in this idea that everyone's faith was much stronger than mine. Everyone's relationship with God was this pristine, perfect, 80s sitcom family between them and God. And me and God kind of had an up and down relationship. I had worked for a church. I had spoken on God's behalf many times. And yet there was this emptiness inside of me where I felt like, yeah, I'm talking about God and I'm speaking about God. But under a lie detector test, do I feel like God is actually ever answering me and talking back to me?
Yeah.
And it was terrifying. And I felt like a hypocrite. And so when I was having these conversations, I legitimately thought I was all alone and having this very complicated relationship with God. And the more I was just speaking honestly and saying, it's hard to believe. It's hard to have faith. Not everyone, people seem to act as if it's an easy thing to go to church and it's an easy thing to feel the presence of God. But for me, it's very, very difficult. God is a mystery. It's a wonderful mystery, and I love solving it, and I love investigating it. But it can be much harder than it appears for so many people. And when I started these conversations, I was so surprised when other people who were clergy members, people who were of different faiths, of Judaism or whatever, Islam, and coming to me and said, my faith is hard too. Because sometimes I yell at the sky. At least you're yelling in the right place. I'm going to remember that. That's beautiful. But I yell at the sky, and sometimes I never hear an answer back. Mm-hmm. And that's so terrifying. Yeah. And when I would write these things, I thought, no one else is going to understand this. I'm alone on this island. And all of a sudden, there were thousands of people on this island with me. And the more real I got and talked about my faith crisis and talked about my doubts. And I think doubt is a virtue. I found so much more faith in my exploring my doubts than I ever had in my thought certainty I used to have. Yeah. I used to be certain about God and how it worked. And the more I asked questions, those hard, tough questions, like, why do I have depression? God, why are you letting me go through this? Our youngest son was diagnosed with autism 20 some years ago. And that was probably one of the first fractures in my faith life. And I remember it was those doubts in which he had me ask God some tough questions and ask myself some tough questions. Yeah. And the more I did that, the more God started showing up to me in these conversations. And I don't pretend to know how it works. I would never say, oh yeah, no, God has got a Facebook account. I mean, there's a show that came out on CBS, I think a couple of years ago, and it came out after I had started my blog and everything. Like, I can't remember, God friended me. And I remember kind of being like, oh, come on, I've been doing that for 4 years before that.
I remember that.
And I don't believe that God's answering me through Facebook on some time. I just think these things were coded in my heart at creation. Yeah. These understandings and this love and this truth were coded inside of me long ago. And I'm just starting to uncover them. I don't believe God exists on a cloud and God's typing down to me. I believe that God exists inside of my heart and in my neighbor and in people around me and the relationships around me. And this just becoming a writer helped me slow everything else down, because that's part of being a writer, is you have to be observant and you have to take a deep breath and you have to be a witness to what's happening, whether it's in your imagination or in the real world. Yeah. And that's what this helped me do. It helped me slow down my life and be more aware of where God is present. And usually it's in my trembling heart.
Absolutely. And here's the thing too that I've started to understand over the years, John, is like, so I too am an aspiring writer, and I've got a book coming out. One of the things that I wrote in there that, again, I believe it was just kind of basically taking notes, just let God put it on my heart and let me kind of like what Hank Williams used to say, what was it? God writes the songs, I just hold the pen. And so when my book comes out, the one that I'm talking about, my first novel, if it sucks, it was Jason. If it's pretty decent, then well, the good parts are the divinely inspired, right? Well, one of the things I write in the book is a revelation that I had where so many people wonder why the struggles happen. And I too, Job is a great example, the most righteous man of his time. He's sitting there, he's crying out to God. I think that at the end of the day, God wants us in the type of relationship with it that you have started to find, in that he leaves a little work undone for us to join him in. It's not that he doesn't need us, right? But he loves a relationship. And so it's funny because you said something there that you were afraid, or you didn't express doubt whenever you were younger. My father used to tell me, you never question God. You never question God. Okay, well, here's the little secret about that. Anything that pops in our head, it's not like you can hide it from him, and so it's okay to all of a sudden be authentic with him so that those thoughts can get processed. And so that's one of the things that, as in reading your writing, that's what I take from that. It's this honest, open relationship that then allows God to go, oh, okay, so you do realize I know everything that's going on. You're not hiding anything, and I'm okay with it. I still love you. Now, what I would like to back up to, but especially before we get, I would like to talk a little bit about the book. But do you mind sharing kind of the road to that crisis moment that kind of brought you to that breaking point?
Sure. It was probably, it was unfolding long before I ever this crisis. I didn't know how sick I was. I didn't know how broken I was. I didn't know how much faith I had lost. Everything with my relationship with God was all kind of routine, brushing the teeth. You go to church, you say your prayers. If someone's going to do grace, we're going to say grace at Thanksgiving. Great. It was all very formal. And even though I talked and spoken about having a personal relationship with God, with the divine, it never really felt personal to me. I was told it was personal, but I never really felt that personal friendship, relational father-child relationship. It was always very detached. But over time, probably the first one was our son was diagnosed with autism many years ago. And in Wyoming in 2002, being diagnosed with autism, autism now is a lot different than it was 20 years ago. Yeah. There's a lot more awareness. There's a lot more support out there. There's a lot more information and community building. Social media, of all the tricky things of social media, the one good thing that it did do is it brought a lot of people who have these communities together. Children living with special needs, and it brought all these parents together. So this was long before that. We had no resources. It was just kind of us on our own. And I remember going to church with our son, and he couldn't, even as a 2 or 3-year-old, he couldn't sit still. It was almost like he was having constant seizures, and just kind of feeling, man, we're kind of an outcast in this community. Like, people are looking at us like, please shush, And I remember being really angry about that, because I had worked for a church before this, and thinking maybe I was like that when I was at church. And I remember talking to spiritual advisors and then saying, oh, just pray harder and God will, whatever happens will happen and God will take care of it. And so I gave myself to a year of constant prayer and asking God, okay, help take this, help our son, because you're grieving. He was very impacted early on, and you had your child sitting there in your lap, physically there, but you're grieving all the things that your doctors are telling you he'll never experience in his life. He will never live on his own. He might not ever speak. He might not ever have a relationship with another person. He might not ever have a first kiss. All these things in your mind, you're thinking about these things that we take for granted, that specialists are telling us he will never experience. And I remember grieving for that entire year, but asking God to take it and help us. and it never happened. And I remember specifically saying, well, have I no credit in the bank with God? I had been good. I've been a good boy my whole life. I followed the rules. I've done everything I'm supposed to do. Where is this relief? Why do I not have any credit? And I kind of, for about 10 years, didn't even think about God. Like I moved on and just said, okay, God is not, I believe in God. God doesn't believe in me. And so for about 10 years, I just kind of like detached. When someone would say grace at dinner, I would just mouth my words and say, okay, God's there. I never stopped believing in the existence of God and the miracle of the divine. I just thought, I'm just a penny that fell through the cracks in God's plan. Like I've been forsaken. So it was about 2015 when the second break came, when all of a sudden I put my entire identity, I kind of given up my career and I became a stay-at-home dad. We had 3 children. Our oldest son was impacted with autism, and I put my entire soul and heart into helping raise him. And about 2015, he kind of emerged from this cloud, from this knot he was in, and he didn't really need me as much anymore. He was fully integrated in school. He had worked so hard and done so many things to kind of navigate this tricky diagnosis. And by the time he was getting ready to be like a sophomore and junior in high school, if you didn't know him, you just think he was a quirky guy who, maybe a little shy, super funny, but no one would have seen that diagnosis. And all of a sudden, I was at this crisis again. I was like, okay, before I was super Christian and I gave up that identity. Now I'm a super dad, but I don't need to be anymore. Now I'm a 40-year-old. All my friends are lawyers and accountants and driving fancy cars, and they're doing all these amazing things. And here I am, I don't really have a job. I don't have a plan in life. I was untethered to everything I thought I was going to be when I was 20 years old. All of a sudden, I remember waking up one day and saying, I have no idea where I'm going to be in 10 years. Like, I have no plan. There's nothing here. And I fell apart. Like, I think I was depressed long before that, but I believe depression really, really kind of announced itself. It was like, oh, I'm here. And then I fell into misery. I fell into just apathy. I fell into just giving up and saying, okay, I have no place on this earth. There is nowhere for me to be. I performed improv comedy. I ran a troupe here in town. When I was younger, I had illusions I was going to be in Saturday Night Live. That fell through. And so but I still was doing things around town, like comedy and stuff like that. And eventually nothing felt fun anymore. I gave that up. I was like, I don't want to do that anymore. And so I had no identity. I was a father, but I wasn't needed like I was. I was a husband, but my wife has her career and she's doing great things and amazing things. And I was nothing. And there's nothing there. I can't quite explain the feeling of complete helplessness and hopelessness when you wake up and you realize you have nothing that when you're on your hospice bed, you can look back to and say, hey, I did that.
Yeah.
And so I was adrift, and I just collapsed almost like a star into itself. And for about a year, from 2015 to 2016, I was self-destructive. I was not kind to people. I was angry all the time. And it was right about then that I was like, I have no skill set. Like, that was the other thing. I had no career opportunities. I live in a small town. There was nowhere for me to go. And all of a sudden, financially, I'm like, look at all these friends of mine who are got timeshares. I'm struggling to pay my bills this month. And that's when God and I kind of found each other. Well, God was always there. I rediscovered God. I just started having these, and what I thought were imaginary conversations on Facebook. Yeah. But it was, and it's not like my life is perfect now. I'll still have bouts of doubt and hurt and things like that. But I know that when I turn inward and I start listening to these lyrics that were written in my heart long ago, that I know that there's some answers for me there. And I know that there's peace for me there. And I know that there's that relationship with God it's a weird one, and I would never advise someone to say, hey, how are you and God, you have a faith crisis, go to Facebook and get back together. I would never advise that for anyone else. But I know for me, the more I've written 1,400 of these Hey God, Hey John conversations at this point.
Wow.
And each one of them, I write from a moment when I feel I'm not like writing, what does someone want to hear? Or here's an interesting parable I'll type up. No, I'm writing from exactly what I'm going through in that moment. And a lot of the times I'm a little pissed off, I'm a little sad, I'm a little worried, and I write from that emotion. And God always meets me where I'm feeling and writes back.
That is so amazing, and that's so beautiful, and it again, it reinforces why I think this conversation is taking place. I guess it was probably about 4 years ago. I wasn't far from where you found yourself. My life had, I had come out of a 17-year marriage and I'm a guy that doesn't believe in divorce. I never did believe in divorce, but my, the mother of my beautiful, amazing, gorgeous daughters, she made that decision for us after 17 years of just putting it was very difficult. It was a very difficult 17 years. But so I'm sitting in my office one day, and I had I'd failed I had a failed congressional run, and I had sold what my business is, and nobody needed me. And man, kind of to what you were talking about, laying on your hospice bed, man, bringing into the present. When you reach that point where you realize, if I didn't get out of bed today, no one would really care. Right. It's such a haunting, empty, scary feeling to think, man, I don't have to get out of bed today. And so I was at that point, and right where you were, I remember telling one of my friends, I said, man, I know I've got gifts and talents, but I feel like I've just been put out to pasture and nobody cares. And here's what he reminded me of. He said, before David became king, he was out in the middle of the pasture with nothing but a bunch of sheep, And so maybe you're just out in the pasture for a moment, but God's got things planned for you. And so it was somewhere around there, I picked up this book that I had written in 2010. So 35-year-old Jason, who's talking about whenever I escaped from corporate America, became an entrepreneur. And there's a section in there where I'm actually talking to middle-aged guys, and that are where I found myself. And I was like, oh my gosh, you said you had these words on your heart. I had these words that I was reading of my own. So 35-year-old Jason was kicking 43-year-old, I guess at the time, or 42-year-old Jason in the rear. And that's whenever I decided, you know what, I'm going to start creating and see what happens. And that's whenever I started my podcast and I started writing again. Do you remember the day that you were drawn to Facebook of all places and started this conversation? Is that where it started, or did you start it offline first and then took it to Facebook?
Oh, no. I might have said this to you before. I would never recommend any writer or person trying to, just a writer in general. Like, don't put all your content on a social media platform where someone can cut and paste it and change it or do whatever.
Right.
I had a very unorthodox approach in which early on, when I was in that broken moment, I thought, here's everyone posting, they went on a beautiful vacation, and their kids, their ties are straightened perfectly. And look at this amazing meal, healthy meal they're eating beachside. And I was just like, my life isn't like that. I am covered in Cheeto dust, and I'm not getting off the couch, and I'm adrift. And so, I'm gonna let people know that this other part of the world actually exists. Like, people are not all happy-go-lucky. And so I remember the first conversation I had with God in these conversations. I think we talked about Survivor the night before. And I remember, it was Lost. And we were talking about I was rewatching Lost, and just talking about how I thought God acted a little too much like an ABC writer, and just like too much suspense. Like, just give me some answers, make it a little bit easier. Let's adjust to my intellect level. and let's lower the bar for what I'm supposed to interpret signs and, read passages and to be able to be a smart person. And I remember God and I had this back and forth at the end. And when I was finished, I wrote it, and I thought it was pretty funny. I was like, I can't put this out there. I used to work for a church. A lot of my early on Facebook friends were all people I was associated with when I worked for a church. And immediately I was like, what's my aunt going to think? Or what is, this person going to think? And I was like, there was this compulsion to say, just press send, just do it. And I sat there, and I'll admit, so I sat there for a long time, and then eventually I did it. And I remember I shut my old school laptop. That was back when laptops were like this thick. You had to use a chainsaw motor to get it going. I remember closing it and be like, okay, that's awful, And then I opened it up again, like 5 people liked it, and kind of, oh, that's great. I had that conversation with God all the time. And even early on, there was that little light saying, that's interesting. I thought I was the only one who felt that way. I thought I was the only one who had a kind of a broken relationship with faith. And it was that very first conversation. But I will say this, every time I post something just about every day now, whether it's on my own personal Facebook page, I post a poem a day. And I do the same thing. I write it out instantaneously, and I don't even edit it. And I just put it out there immediately, because if I overthink it, I won't do it. So I am still doing this today. Or my Hey God, Hey John page, I'll post something, and I'll always have that sense of fear, even now. Yeah. I don't have any ego involvement. I don't know what a successful writer is or anything like that. Doesn't make any sense to me. It doesn't. I mean, I don't take a lot of so there's not. I don't find any currency in likes. Or I'm really grateful that people do, but it doesn't make me feel better about myself. I don't feel like I'm a successful person because people like my Facebook stuff. Yep. But I will always worry for half a second. Oh my gosh, what is somebody going to think about this? I'm writing something that, number one, even talking about God, even using the word God on Facebook is a trigger of it. And I intentionally don't try to teach people, this is my version of God, and now you need to go this way too. Yeah. I'm very clear. I have a lot of atheists who follow my writing, and I'm always very cognizant. Like, I don't want them to feel like, oh no, this is just for people who have faith. Yeah. Like I want people to be drawn in from wherever they're at. And I believe God will meet them there.
Absolutely.
But even to this day, I will fret, and I posted a poem this morning, and even now I fretted and I wondered, oh my gosh, what is my neighbor going to think if I say this, talking about crying, and tears are important. It's like, oh man, I live in a small town, and there's still that half beat of worrying about what other people think. Right. And then there's that compulsion that takes over. Just press send, just put it out there, because if you're going to help one person, just one person, then that is your act of service. Yeah. That's how I looked at this as like, I'm not really good at anything else. I can't build anything. I can't sell anything. It's like say anything. Oh, I think with Lloyd Doppler when he's sitting there.
Yes. I don't want to process anything. Selling this process. Oh, I'm with you. Absolutely.
Yes. I was like, I don't really have a huge skill set, but what I can do is I can be vulnerable. I can talk about my faith. I can talk about my journey through spirituality, and I can put it out there in real time. And maybe someone in New Zealand, or maybe someone in Canada, or maybe someone in Texas, or maybe someone in Wyoming where I live can read it and be like, oh, thank goodness someone said that.
Yeah.
And so that's what keeps me doing it, despite the feelings of shame that sometimes I have.
That is gutsy, man. And it's awesome because I'm like, I get weirded out whenever people come up to me that I haven't seen in a long time and go, oh, so how was your trip to Florida? But you've got people coming up to you going, oh man, are you okay today? I read that poem where you were crying last night. So, but here's the thing that is so cool about what you're doing, John. And it took me probably, like, you can relate to this, over 40 years to be completely honest with who I am as a human being. I lived all of my life. For example, let's say you had crushed it and you were on Second City and then made your way to SNL, and you are on your way to being the next, Sandler, love it. Spade, fill in the blank.
Sure.
But you were good at that. But along the way, you realized, well, everybody said I was funny and I'm good at it. I'm able to make people laugh. And now I'm getting paid to do it, but I really hate it. A lot of people get in that trap. That's what I got into. I got in that trap of like business and that sort of thing, going, well, you're good at business. You look like a business guy. You've had some success in business, but I'm sitting there going, finally going, but I hate business. I don't just for business. I don't like to make money just for money's sake. It doesn't.
Right.
So now I had to, it was hard to own that. What you did, which I think is so cool, and I'm trying. I can't say that I've fully attained this, but it's not just getting real with yourself and who you are, but getting real before God. He already knows, but we see if this resonates with you. And I might let this segue into the poem that I asked you to have at the ready, because it hit me so hard, man. It was so beautiful. I think, and I've said it on this program before, I think so many of us go through life in the witness protection program. I think we, I heard Beth Moore first say that about going to church. We show up to church in the witness protection program, smiles on our face, look at my beautiful kids, my beautiful life. We're going to go have a beautiful lunch after this and we'll have a beautiful week. But really inside it's a catastrophe. It's not just Sunday, man. I think a lot of people live their lives in the witness protection program because they're so scared to say, hey, this is who I am. I know there's a God, but I'm having doubts about whether or not he believes it. That was beautifully said, by the way. I believe in him, but he doesn't believe in me because the results sure don't seem to bear that out. That is, that's good stuff. But with that, if you wouldn't mind, and I'll tell you, and listener, just to kind of prompt this, I don't know whether I should read this before or not. It's really short, before or after you read the poem, but I'm going to go ahead and tell you my favorite line. It's paraphrased from the poem that I've asked you to read is this: what now? Anything, everything. What an adventure it is to come undone. Dude, that just hits me. But because it can be one or two things, man. For some people to come undone, it can be shattering, or they never pick themselves up off the floor. But with the approach that you've taken, what an adventure. The world is before you. Dale Carnegie said, every day is a new life for a wise man. And you encapsulated that. And it just, I mean, look, I gotta pull in the reins here because I get so excited about that message. So with that, would you do me and this audience the honor of reading that poem in its completion?
Absolutely. And I wrote this, as I write every poem, not from a place of instruction, not from a place of, oh, John's got this all figured out, and now I'm going to give you my sermon. I wrote this one specifically a couple weeks ago, just a couple weeks ago. And I was, most of the time I can't remember why I wrote something. I can't look back. It's like, oh no, I saw a unicorn jump across the horizon and a dove landed on and whispered something in my, I don't have these romantic moments.
Right.
But I remember I was at a Barnes & Noble cafe, and there was this little girl sitting next to her grandma, and her grandma was teaching her how to do, or they had like an origami workbook, and they were doing it. And eventually the girl said, I'm just so frustrated, I can't do this. And the grandmother said something, I'm going to paraphrase, just crumple it up and it will still be perfect because you did it. And because she wanted to give it to her grandma, she goes, I will still put your name on it and I will still love it. And so I remember thinking of that and thinking about, oh man, I looked at my life like I wanted to be perfect. I needed to have everything right in my life. When at the end of the day, just show up as who you are, as who you were born to be. Quit following the script that you were given, because this is what it's supposed to be. So that I wrote it from that. I remember hearing that. I remember feeling a little shaken inside. And so I wrote this and put it on Facebook immediately without editing it. Again, if you're a writer, don't do that. Okay. I was born with a last name and all of the expectations that came with it. From birth, I was crafted to be an origami swan, to have perfectly folded edges, to exist on a shelf, to be looked at from a distance, to appear complete, to live precisely. And I tried to live that way. I swear that I did. Even during the days when I could feel the exact geometry inside of me start to turn into wild poetry, I would resist the urge to let go of the form I was told to live by if I wanted to be happy. I stayed as folded as I could, despite the growing sound of crinkling paper coming from inside of my loose leaf heart. But one morning, not too long ago, I woke up and I noticed that my perfectly shaped swan wing had a slight wrinkle in it. I tried to hide my imperfections from the world by letting people only see my good side, my faultless side, my seamless side. But then a short while later, I noticed that my other wing had lost its tight fold and was curling outward as well. I was coming undone and unfolded right in front of the world. And the rest of me started falling apart soon after. Within a short time, I no longer looked like the perfect swan I was told to be. I had become a flattened out piece of paper with more crow's feet creases in it than I could count. Eventually, a breeze came and took me off my shelf and carried me out to the window and into the untamed wild. And it was in that moment, in my most unfurled self, that I cried out to God. Where are my perfect folds? I asked. Where have my straight lines gone? I asked the empty sky. God sprouted out of the ground next to me in the form of a wildflower and God said, they're all gone, my love. All those things that you once thought you were, well, they're all gone now. Why are you crying? God asked me, while stretching out above me with flower petals of at least a half dozen colors that I had never seen before from my safe shelf that I had been living my life by. Because without my folds and the lines that I was given, I said to God, I have no purpose. Without my hard edges and my defined creases, I don't know who I am anymore, and I don't know who I will be. I do, God said while exploding into an Easter bloom. You finally get to be you. You are now an untouched canvas who gets to decide what it's marked with. You are lucky enough to be a blank piece of paper that gets to choose what's written on it. You get to be a selection of art that you helped create. You are now able to leave behind the expectations this world had for you to be perfect, and now you get to be the beautiful mess I made you to be. God was now a towering wildflower that was rising up to kiss the sun. And I looked at myself in that moment with newfound eyes. Instead of being a tightly bound together swan, I was an outstretched creation. Instead of being a perfect sculpture, I was an open cup. What now? I asked the wildflower of God. What now? God laughed. Anything. Everything. It's all in front of you. It's all an adventure from here. And with that, a gust of wind picked me up again and carried me to the horizon. And even though I had been a swan my whole life, the first time I ever flew was the moment I lost my wings. Oh, what an adventure it is to come undone.
God, that is so beautiful. It's that's just, man, thank you for that. That
Oh,
is so,
absolutely.
and that's the thing that, and I have to remind myself of it all the time. And here's the cool thing, and I bet you've seen this too, John, that once you start to grasp the reality of our ability to do that, to truly live a new life each and every day, man, it is the drudgery starts to fall
Yeah.
away little
Yeah.
by little. And um, and so for you to be able to use this gift, let me ask you this, because I've got two
Yeah.
daughters, you have children, you have three children, correct?
3 boys. Yeah, 3 feral children.
So, yeah, right. So how do you impart that to them? Because I've got, and let me just tell you where I am with mine.
Yeah.
So I've got two that are about to graduate from college, one that's a senior who is so locked into, I can tell she's locked into this mindset that
Yeah.
I have to graduate, get the job, have, you know, boom, 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 boom. And then the other one who she's she's figured out, she wrote her first piece she goes to University of Colorado at Boulder. She wrote her first piece for The Bold. She's following her passion as a writer. And I'm just like, yes, I don't care. Yes, I want you to support yourself. You're getting off the payroll. You got to contribute to society. You got to be productive, but you're finding something that it aligns your passions with some utility. And it's so exciting. How are you imparting that wisdom that you have discovered to your boys that it took you and I so long to realize? How are you doing, or have you got there yet?
I'm still working on it, and it's really interesting. Before, when you said it took you 40 years, you're the third person I've heard say that in the last week, that it was about in their 40s that it took for them to strip bare all those other worldly, materialistic things, to let them fall off like leaves in autumn. And it takes about 40 years. And someone asked me, do you wish your kids don't have to go through that experience? And I guess as a father, your goal is to protect your children from any kind of suffering or pain. Yes, of course. But there is meaning. There's meaning in being lost.
You got it.
There's meaning in suffering. I don't want to protect my kids from every pitfall, because then we're just in some Hallmark Christmas movie. Right. I want my kids to have the full experience of life, and that means to have your heart broken. Yeah. And that means to maybe get lost in the woods, and that means maybe to, get bitten by a snake or whatever it is out there, because it's in those moments. First of all, you're going to learn how incredibly strong and resilient you are, and how strong and resilient the human heart is. But if you had your heart broken, that means you cared.
Yeah.
And if you got hurt, that means you tried. And if you failed, that means you have gotten up again. And I want them, I don't wish it upon them, but in those moments where they're down on the ground, I want them to know that this isn't the end, that this is just a beat in your story. I tell my kids this, I view every life that's been created by God as a singular event that the universe has never seen before. You are a single note that has never been played before, and you have to honor your note, whatever it is, whatever this life you've been given, the singular event that will never take place ever again in the history of the cosmos, this ever expanding universe that is going on to infinity. You're it. There's no one else like you, and never will be. So it's up to you to embrace this as fully as you can. And to think that at 18, I mean, I have some children who are certain at 18 and 19 exactly what they're going to be in their life. And I'm like, that's great. Certainty, but certainty doesn't always lead you. Be careful with certainty, because when it doesn't pan out the way you think it's going to, you can be like your old man. And then all of a sudden you're like, well, I was certain about these things, and now I don't have those certainty. And now I'm going to lose 10 years of my life just giving up. Don't be like that. You can have those dark moments, but it's all part of the adventure, and embrace that adventure. Don't become apathetic like I had become. Wow. So it's a tricky proposition, because you want your kids to be safe, and you don't want them to cry. You don't want them to get scars. Yeah. But at the end of the day, when we're all balls of light somewhere in heaven and we're talking together, I want them to say, this is my story, as we're all talking to these other balls of light and we're all talking to each other. This is how I overcame. This is what I went through. This is why it mattered. And a lot of any good movie, any good novel, any good story has those moments of heartache and suffering where you learn so much about yourself. And I think as parents, our job is to be there for them when they reach it. But man, it's hard. You can't protect them from it. I mean, I have a feeling my parents wouldn't have wished this. My parents were much more analytical and right brain thinking than I ever was. They never would have wanted me to be a lost writer and artist for as long as I would. But I had to go through that. I had to have those 40 years in the desert in order to appreciate the water now. I was thirsty for so long, and now every sip of water is a miracle for me. And it was really interesting how you talked about that. My life for a while, I really looked at, this is what I want out of life. I want to be rich. I want to be successful. Here's all the things. Here's all this fruit I want to eat. But the fruit was like wax fruit that had no taste to it.
Yep.
And now, even though I'm still buying generic cereal, I'm driving a beat up car, I'm using a $150 laptop, I am not a success by anything materialistic the world will say, but I'm as happy as I've ever been. because the fruit I'm eating is so sweet, and it feels like it's my fruit. It's the fruit I was born to eat. So I don't know. That's a weird way of answering that, but that's how I feel.
And it's so beautifully said. And I get it. I do that. You know, I want the girls to experience those. I'm taking back to the movie Vanilla Sky, you know, weird movie, but great movie where, you know, the guy, Brian, I think was his name, Tom Cruise's best friend. He said the bitter and the sweet, you know, you can't have the sweet without you can't appreciate the sweet without the bitter. And then, you know, one of the things you mentioned there too, that again, it just confirms this, the divine appointment that is this conversation. When I was going through the hell, and I went through a living hell at points in my life. One of the things that sustained me was that, and it's like, I call you a modern day psalmist. It's, man, I don't think that we're on this long trajectory, this whole arc of whatever history is. I don't know when it's all going to stop, you know, and I believe just what you said, the things happening right now, we will tell these stories. Your poems will be read and will be honored just as the Psalms are read. The story of Job and David and Saul, you fill in the blank, you know, Rahab, those stories that's not where it ends. That the Bible does not contain all of, you know, humanity's history forever and ever and ever. So the fact that you have you understand that that's happening right now will one day be celebrated at a different time. And then finally, to that listener that's out there, that John and I have both shared our hearts a little bit about the whole, man, you nailed something that I struggled with forever. I had friends that were starting to buy second homes in places like Carmel and Aspen. And here's the crazy thing, John. I was the guy that was supposed to do all those things. I had the high EQ. I was popular. I had all the makings of this guy that was going to hit life and crush it. And I mean, in some standards, I guess, you look back and okay, you did okay, but no, I was constantly comparing myself going, what me? And now this black t-shirt is the most exciting thing I have right now. I love my black. I say this all the time. I love my black t-shirts because where my real value comes is reading your poems, writing my own poems, creating this podcast. I will not make one red cent off our conversation today, but all the money in the world could not replace connecting with you, hearing your story, and the joy that I will take in creating, like, this is my art. You like your poems. I will get to sit down and in post-production figure out how to get this out to the world, and to know that someone out there that I've never met, that's never met you, will hear this conversation and go, I'm 40, life sucks. And those guys seem to be doing okay. And they're not doing okay for the reasons why most people think others are doing okay. They're not on Instagram, you know, in front of a Lamborghini or crushing it at St. Bart's. No, one's in Cheyenne, Wyoming with 20-degree wind chill. The other's in Tyler, Texas, where it's hot as hell. And they're okay. So, and and finally, my last point on your what you said there at the last about turning 40, and I think one of the reasons why I'm probably the third or fourth person that has said this thing to you is this. I before I had all these revelations about material items and creating and all that, I used to say, once I turn 40, your I don't give a crap meter pegs. There's something magical about turning 40 that I think, and I don't know. There's something, I don't know what it is in the arc of one's life that all of a sudden at 40, you start to go, I don't care what people think about me, not in a kind of a nihilistic way, but in kind of I realize what you just said. You find no currency in the likes. Whenever we start to realize there's no great currency in being liked and adored by everybody and impressing people, having them be impressed with you. Instead, the real value is just real friendships. Those few people who you can truly be who you are and still like you. That's magical, man. And
No, it's and what I say to my kids applies with me and you and the neighbor down the street. Each of us have a singular life, the singular we are born as individual pieces of artwork and creation. And the real value of life is to honor that and to be who you are authentically. And what you're doing, producing this and living passionately through this, you are doing that. You're playing that note over and over and over, and someone's going to hear that lyric and it's going to change a life. And that's what this is about. This isn't about we don't go on to the hereafter with money bags. No, we go on with the ties we've bonded with one another, as well as the art we've helped create here on earth to make life easier for the people behind us, who can hear your story of survival, the things you've gone through, and they'll hear, oh, he survived it. And that's why you survived. That's why we survived these trials, so we can tell other people, here's how I did it. Yeah. It might not work exactly how it worked for me, but here's the guideposts I used to get through the swamp. Yeah. And that's why we survive. That's why we don't give up, because we can be those landmarks for other people to use.
Well, before I let you go, speaking of your art and what you've created, I want you to talk a little bit about your book, where people can find it, and just kind of what are some of the cool conversations that they get to read.
Oh yeah, so the book, it's about the first maybe 400 conversations I wrote on Facebook with God. It's called Hey God, Hey John, very cleverly titled. Hey God, Hey John, what happens when God writes back, on Facebook. They're probably from about 2016 through 2018 through 2019, the first kind of batch of these conversations. It definitely shows the arc of where I started, just like, these are just ridiculous conversations that I want people to, it's almost, I thought it was like a comic strip. And then very gradually, it's a pretty big book. It's like 3 pounds. It's almost, it could be used as like some sort of paperweight too, if you didn't, or some sort of ornament. But it shows this arc of this just benign, shallow, insipid conversations. And then little by little, unintentionally on my part, you see the divine start weaving in a little bit more every single conversation. And by the end of it, I'm a broken new person. I'm not perfect. I'm not a happy-go-lucky person who goes out and is on fire with the Lord. But no, I'm a person who's on a new path. And I have a new relationship with God. And I think I've had a lot of people reach out to me and say, hey, this book has helped me at least have these honest conversations with God. I didn't know how sick I was. I didn't know how broken this dialogue I was having with my prayer life was. But reading this book showed me, hey, other people yell at God too. It's okay. God can take it. It's okay to cry with God. It's okay not to look perfect. And so people can find it on Amazon, the empire that is Amazon, Barnes and Noble. It can be ordered through most major bookstores. And there I have a Facebook page called, again, cleverly titled Hey God, Hey John, where I do a couple posts every week there. And then on my own personal Facebook page of John Roedel, which I had just opened up as a park reserve for whoever. I have maxed out the friends, but people can just come, and I post just about every day on my personal Facebook page, just kind of real time where I am in my heart. And I write there every day, and people can join there and visit and leave when they're bored of it. So I kind of do that.
Well, John, we just crushed an hour, but
oh my gosh,
or so very close to it. And I'm so thankful for this. I'm so glad that I now know you, that you don't just exist on someone else's podcast in my headphones, and you're not just trapped in my phone, but actually I do hope to one day get out to, I've never been to Wyoming, Montana, all of that whole area, the Big Sky country.
Yeah.
And Cheyenne sounds like my kind of place. It's about the size of Tyler, where I live. I mean, you guys are what, 65,000 ish? Is that right?
We are the biggest town in Wyoming. Yeah. That's 60,000 in the town. We're the biggest. 500,000 people live in Wyoming. That's like a city block in New York.
Yeah.
But it's a huge state. We're all kind of isolated and separated. It's definitely cowboy country. I've lived here. My family moved here in the mid 1800s and opened up a pharmacy. Wow. And I've been, Roedels have been here ever since. So yes, we are deep roots here in Wyoming.
Well, if I ever get up that way, and Jimlin and I do plan, how far are you from, I guess everybody goes to Jackson Hole when they go to Wyoming. How far are you?
We're on the opposite side.
Yeah.
So Jackson Hole's up by Montana. We're down by Denver.
Yeah.
Well, I'm only about an hour and a half away from Denver.
Okay, well, there you go. Then we are going to we're going to have to make this work before Abby graduates from CU Boulder, because I'm flying into Denver.
Oh, yeah.
I'm flying
Yeah,
into Denver next week, actually.
Yeah.
So that would be cool to find some time and maybe sit down and do another
Absolutely.
conversation. And I've actually got some poems that I've wrote a series of Stoic poems that are literally just in a notebook that I'll share those with you at some point. But
awesome.
John, let's stay in touch. This just did my heart so much good, man. I'm so grateful.
I am honored. No, absolutely. It was a quick hour. I can't believe we talked. It just flew by. You're so gifted, and I was so grateful to be here.
Well, thanks so much. Sit tight, and I'll say goodbye to you momentarily. Just sit tight. I'll be right back. And real quick, if you're watching on the YouTube channel, thank you so very much for joining this episode of the Jason Wright Show. Thank you to John Roedel. My gosh, if you were not uplifted and inspired by this conversation, I don't know. I might have to hang it up. I don't know what to do. But seriously, thank you to John for coming on the program. Thank you for you listening. You'll be able to also hear this on the podcast on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts. Please, please, please leave us a 5-star rating, subscribe to the channel, and also please consider signing up for the Vitruvian Letter, my personal newsletter, where it's just a little nugget of what I'm trying to do to improve always in all ways, as my show's motto is. You can do that at jasonrightnow.com. Real simple, doesn't cost a penny. It's low calorie, it's non-political, it's all just good stuff. So check it out. And with that, thank you for joining us on this episode of the Jason Wright Show.